At 3:17 in the morning, the entire neighborhood lost water at the exact same time. Sprinklers stopped mid-spin. Faucets started coughing air. Pool pumps died. Then the screaming started. I was standing beside my old cattle fence holding a thermos of black coffee when I saw headlights racing down County Road 12 toward the pumping station. Red emergency lights flashed across the dry Texas dirt like lightning. Somewhere in the distance, a woman was yelling so loud I could hear her over the windmill creaking behind me. That woman was Rebecca Crawford, president of the Silver Mesa Estates HOA, and she looked like she was about 5 seconds away from losing her mind. "Get this water back on right now," she screamed at a county engineer standing beside the control shed. The poor guy looked exhausted. Sweat soaked through his reflective vest, even though the air was cold. He checked the pressure gauge one more time, then slowly turned toward Rebecca and asked the one question that changed everything. "Who authorized your HOA to access Turner Reservoir?" Silence. Complete silence. Rebecca blinked at him like her brain had stopped working. Her husband stood behind her in pajama pants holding a flashlight. Half the neighborhood was outside now. Angry homeowners. Kids crying. Dogs barking. Somebody shouted that their pipes were making grinding noises. Another guy yelled that his wife's dialysis machine needed water pressure. And right in the middle of all that panic, Rebecca pointed straight at me. "This is him," she yelled. "He shut us off because he's bitter about the easement dispute." Every head turned toward me at once. Now, if you saw me standing there that night, you probably wouldn't think much of me. 70-year-old rancher. Worn boots. Beat-up denim jacket. Gray beard. The kind of guy most people drive past without noticing. But here's the thing. Silver Mesa Estates wasn't built around that reservoir. It survived because of it. And that reservoir sat on my land. Land my grandfather bought in 1947 for less money than Rebecca probably spent on her kitchen countertops. Big mistake, Rebecca. Real big mistake. I took one sip of coffee and looked at the county engineer. "Pressure valves locked?" I asked. He nodded once. Emergency drought protections activated automatically at midnight. You could actually hear people whispering after that. Rebecca stepped closer to me, heels sinking into the dirt. Even at 3 in the morning, she somehow looked like she was heading to a country club brunch. Perfect blonde hair. Expensive coat. That fake smile rich people use right before they threaten somebody. "You can't do this," she snapped. "This community has rights." I just looked at her for a second. Didn't yell. Didn't argue. Didn't move. That's when I noticed something interesting. The county engineer wouldn't even look her in the eye anymore. He was staring at me instead. Respectfully. Nervously. Like he knew exactly how bad this situation really was. Rebecca didn't notice yet, but some of the homeowners did. Especially when I said 5 words that made the entire crowd go quiet. "That water was never yours." Nobody spoke after that. Just the sound of dry wind moving through cedar trees and the faint hum of backup generators kicking on across the subdivision. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that thought they owned everything around them, drop a comment below because trust me, what Rebecca Crawford tried to do to my ranch makes most HOA horror stories look like kindergarten drama. And the craziest part? This water shutdown wasn't even revenge. It was automatic. Completely legal. County approved. See, 6 months earlier, Rebecca Crawford thought she'd found the perfect target. A quiet old rancher living alone on 2,700 acres outside Austin. My name's Wyatt Turner. My wife passed away 3 years ago, and after 40 years working cattle and fighting droughts, I figured the rest of my life would be peaceful. I figured wrong. Because the moment Rebecca Crawford arrived in Silver Mesa Estates with her white luxury SUV and her little HOA badge clipped to her blazer like she was the sheriff of Texas, she decided my ranch was standing in the way of her empire. What she didn't know was that my family's name was buried inside every water contract this county depended on. And by the time she figured that out, it was already too late. My grandfather used to say water makes people honest real fast. I did not understand what he meant when I was a kid. Back then, Turner Ranch just felt normal to me. 2,700 acres of dry Texas land, old cedar trees, rusted cattle gates, and enough dust to coat your boots red before breakfast. But every summer, when nearby creeks dried up and neighboring ranches started hauling emergency water tanks down the highway, our reservoir stayed full. Quiet. Deep. Cold enough to fog the air at sunrise. Grandpa called it God's savings account. He built that reservoir in 1948 with 2 bulldozers, 6 ranch hands, and a whole lot of stubbornness after a drought nearly wiped this county off the map. Folks around here still talk about that drought. Cattle dropping dead in pastures, wells turning to mud, farmers praying for rain that never came. Grandpa Turner survived because he found underground spring water running beneath the north ridge of our ranch. Most people thought he got lucky. He did not. He studied old Army geological maps for months before digging. Smart man. Real quiet too. He trusted paperwork more than people. Guess I turned out the same way. Growing up, my father taught me how to repair fences, clear brush, and rebuild pump motors before I was old enough to drive. But the first thing he ever taught me about the reservoir was simple. Never let anybody touch the water system unless they understand it. I remember him saying that while grease covered both his hands under the old pumping station. I was maybe 10 years old. The station looked ancient even back then. Steel pipes, pressure wheels, big warning signs bolted to concrete walls. To me, it felt like the engine room of a ship. To my father, it was survival. Every family around us depended on that water during dry seasons. Ranchers, feed stores, churches, even the county fire department used our emergency access line during wildfires. That reservoir kept people alive long before Silver Mesa Estates showed up with fancy mailboxes and golf carts. After my wife, Carol, passed away, the ranch became real quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Cancer takes pieces of a person long before the funeral ever happens. Anybody who has lived through that knows exactly what I mean. Some mornings I still caught myself reaching for a second coffee mug before realizing she was gone. So I kept busy. Fixed windmills. Repaired fences. Fed cattle before sunrise. Sat beside the reservoir most evenings listening to frogs and coyotes instead of television. Peaceful life. Honest life. Then developers started circling this county like buzzards. Austin kept spreading outward every year. Ranches disappeared fast. One became a shopping center. Another turned into luxury condos. Then came Silver Mesa Estates. At first it was just bulldozers beyond my north fence line. Trees coming down. Concrete trucks rolling past at 6 in the morning. The smell of diesel drifting across my property every day. I figured it was another housing project for city folks wanting fake country life. Happens all the time now. But within 2 years, they built almost 200 homes right beside my ranch. Big white houses packed so tight together you could probably hear your neighbor sneeze through the walls. Then came the clubhouse. Then the fountains. Then the fake decorative creek running through the entrance like they were building Beverly Hills in cattle country. Folks around here laughed at first, until we realized something important. That entire subdivision had no natural water source, no reservoir, no deep aquifer access, no independent pumping station, which meant only one thing. They were feeding off county emergency water contracts tied directly into Turner Reservoir. My reservoir. I still remember the first time I met Rebecca Crawford. I was repairing a broken gate near the North Road when a white Cadillac SUV rolled onto my property without permission. Dust flew everywhere behind her tires. She stepped out wearing sunglasses bigger than my hand and boots, so clean they had clearly never touched real dirt before. "You are Wyatt Turner?" she asked like she already knew the answer. "Depends who is asking," I told her. She smiled the way people do when they're trying to stay polite, but already think they are smarter than you. "Rebecca Crawford, president of Silver Mesa Estates, HOA. We should discuss your access roads and shared water responsibilities." Shared. That word caught my attention immediately. I leaned against the gate and looked past her SUV toward the subdivision sitting miles away in the heat haze. Then I looked back at her. "Ma'am," I said real calmly, "there is nothing shared about Turner Reservoir." She laughed. Actually laughed. Like I had just told the funniest joke she ever heard. That was the moment I knew trouble had arrived at my front gate. Most people think trouble starts loud. It does not. Real trouble usually arrives smiling. After that first conversation at my gate, Rebecca Crawford started showing up everywhere. At first it was little things. A black luxury SUV parked outside my north fence line for an hour. Men in polo shirts taking pictures of my reservoir from the public road. Drones flying over my cattle pastures around sunset. Then the letters started showing up in my mailbox. Official-looking envelopes with HOA logos stamped across the front like they were government documents. The first one claimed I needed to remove unsafe ranch equipment visible from neighboring residential properties. Unsafe ranch equipment turned out to mean my windmill. A windmill that had been standing there since Richard Nixon was president. The second letter said my cattle created excessive odor concerns affecting community enjoyment. I actually laughed reading that one. Lady moves next to a cattle ranch, then complains about cows smelling like cows. Only in America. But here's what bothered me. Rebecca was not just sending complaints. She was building a paper trail. Every letter mentioned community standards, shared infrastructure, public safety concerns, liability exposure. Fancy words designed to make ordinary people nervous. And for some folks, that stuff works. Especially older people living alone. They get scared when legal-sounding documents start arriving in the mail. But my grandfather trained me differently. He always said if somebody keeps using complicated words to explain why they suddenly own your property, check the county records before you panic. So I kept every letter in a folder beside my kitchen table and went back to work, which seemed to annoy Rebecca even more. See, people like her expect emotional reactions. They want shouting, threats, arguments. When they do not get that, they start pushing harder. 3 weeks later, I came back from repairing a fence line near the south pasture and found bright orange stakes hammered into the dirt beside my reservoir road. Survey markers. Somebody had spray-painted little white arrows pointing toward the pumping station. At first, I thought maybe the county was doing maintenance work. Then I spotted the truck parked near the gate. Silver Mesa Estates Infrastructure Committee. That got my attention fast. I drove over and found 2 contractors measuring the gravel road leading to the reservoir. One guy held a clipboard while the other sprayed paint marks directly onto my fence posts. "Afternoon," I said. "Why are you boys marking my road?" The younger one looked nervous immediately. The older guy did not. He pointed toward the subdivision behind us. "HOA expansion project, sir. We are surveying access routes for emergency utility vehicles." I stared at him for a second. "Who told you this road belongs to the HOA?" He flipped through his clipboard. "We have county development approval for shared infrastructure access." Shared again. There was that word. I asked to see the paperwork. He handed me a folded copy of some planning map with highlighted routes crossing directly through Turner Ranch. According to this map, Silver Mesa planned to build a second emergency access lane straight to the pumping station, across my land, without ever speaking to me first. Now here is where things got real interesting. Down in the corner of that map was a tiny approval signature from a county planning assistant named Joel Ramirez. I knew Joel. Nice kid. Honest. Nervous type. Not the kind of guy who would knowingly approve something illegal. Which meant one of 2 things happened. Either Joel got lied to, or Rebecca Crawford had convinced the county that Turner Reservoir was community-controlled infrastructure. That was a serious problem. I folded the map slowly and handed it back. "You boys should probably stop working until this gets sorted out," I said calmly. The older contractor shrugged. "We got permits." "Maybe," I told him, "but you do not have permission." About an hour later, Rebecca herself showed up in that white Cadillac SUV again, dust flying everywhere behind her tires like always. She stepped out holding a leather folder against her chest and smiling like she had already won. "Wyatt," she said sweetly, "there seems to be confusion about the community access easement." "No confusion on my end," I replied. Her smile tightened just a little. "Turner Reservoir supports critical residential infrastructure now. You cannot block emergency development upgrades simply because you dislike the HOA." I looked past her toward the pumping station sitting under the setting sun. Then I looked back at her. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "you keep talking like that reservoir belongs to your neighborhood." "It supports the neighborhood," she snapped back. "That makes it shared infrastructure." Wrong answer. Big mistake. Because right then I realized something dangerous. Rebecca Crawford truly believed usage meant ownership. She thought because Silver Mesa depended on my water, that somehow gave her authority over it. And people who think like that usually do not stop until somebody forces them to. The next Monday started quiet. Too quiet. Anybody who has worked ranch land long enough knows that kind of silence usually means trouble is already moving toward you. I was down by the lower pasture repairing a broken float valve for the cattle trough when my phone started vibrating nonstop in my pocket. At first I ignored it. Most calls these days are either spam or somebody trying to sell me solar panels. But after the 5th call in 10 minutes, I finally checked the screen. For missed calls from my neighbor Earl Benson, 1 voicemail from the county office, and 1 text message from a number I did not recognize. Unauthorized modifications detected at Turner Reservoir. Compliance inspection underway. My stomach dropped immediately. I climbed into my truck and drove hard toward the pumping station. Dust rolled behind me the whole way. Even before I reached the gate, I knew something was wrong. The lock was gone, just cut clean off, and tossed into the grass beside the road. Now let me explain something. People out here do not cut ranch locks by accident. That is not some harmless misunderstanding. Around Texas ranch country, cutting another man's lock is like walking into his house uninvited. Everybody knows better. I parked fast and stepped out. Sure enough, 3 HOA contractors were inside the fenced utility yard beside the reservoir. One guy was wiring something onto the pressure control panel, while another unpacked security cameras from cardboard boxes marked Silver Mesa Estates Utilities Division. Utilities Division. That almost made me laugh. Rebecca had created her own fake little water department. A white county SUV sat parked nearby too. Standing beside it was a skinny county inspector named Martin Hale, sweating through his button-up shirt while pretending not to look nervous. And right in the middle of all of it stood Rebecca Crawford wearing sunglasses and holding an iced coffee like this was some kind of casual business meeting instead of trespassing on private infrastructure. "Morning, Wyatt," she called out before I even reached the fence. "We are upgrading monitoring access for community safety." I stopped dead and looked at the missing lock on the ground, then at the open gate, then at Martin Hale. "You authorized this?" I asked him. Martin swallowed hard. There were concerns regarding emergency access compliance. "That is not what I asked." He looked away immediately. Rebecca stepped forward before he could answer. "The county recognizes the reservoir as essential shared infrastructure now," she said. "Silver Mesa residents have a legal right to emergency oversight." There it was again. Shared. That word was becoming her favorite weapon. One contractor walked past carrying a spool of wiring toward my control shed like he owned the place. I held up one hand. "Stop right there." The guy froze. Rebecca crossed her arms. "Do not make this difficult, Wyatt." I looked at her calmly. "You cut my lock. Your lock blocked critical access." "No," I said quietly. "My lock protected private property." Martin finally stepped in, trying to sound official. "Mr. Turner, failure to cooperate with county-supported utility inspections could result in administrative penalties." Administrative penalties. Fancy way of saying threats. I stared at him for a second, then walked slowly toward the pumping station door. The contractor near the control panel looked uncomfortable now. Smart man. Because anybody who actually understands water systems knows you do not touch old pressure equipment unless you know exactly what you are doing. I pointed at the exposed wiring they had started installing. "You boys shut that panel down before somebody burns out the pressure regulators." Rebecca laughed softly behind me. Always so dramatic. Big mistake. Real big mistake. I opened the steel access door and checked the gauge readings inside. Sure enough, pressure levels were already fluctuating from whatever junk equipment they had connected. Not dangerous yet, but heading there. I turned back toward Rebecca. "You really ought to stop treating infrastructure like it is an HOA swimming pool." Her smile disappeared for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then she recovered fast. "This community has invested millions into local development," she snapped. "You cannot hold water hostage because you are stuck in the past." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca did not understand the difference between paying for houses and owning resources. To her, money created authority. But out here, water law does not care how expensive your subdivision entrance sign looks. Martin cleared his throat nervously and handed me an official-looking paper. Notice of Cooperative Utility Access Review. More nonsense language. The document claimed the county was evaluating whether Silver Mesa qualified for expanded emergency easement rights connected to Turner Reservoir. Evaluating, meaning somebody had already started paperwork behind my back. I folded the notice slowly and slid it into my jacket pocket. "You done?" I asked. Rebecca tilted her head slightly. "Actually, no. Starting today, Silver Mesa contractors will require 24-hour access to this road during infrastructure expansion." I almost smiled hearing that. Almost. Because that was the moment Rebecca Crawford stopped acting like an annoying HOA president and started acting like somebody trying to seize control of infrastructure she did not legally own. And the dangerous part? I still do not think she realized how deep she had already buried herself. Things changed fast after the contractors cut my lock. Before that day, most people in Silver Mesa Estates probably thought I was just the old rancher living beyond the north fence line. Quiet guy. Keeps to himself. Maybe a little stubborn. But after Rebecca started throwing around words like shared infrastructure and emergency easements, suddenly everybody in that subdivision had an opinion about my reservoir. And that is exactly how people like Rebecca operate. They turn private property disputes into public pressure campaigns. Within days, the Silver Mesa neighborhood Facebook page started lighting up with posts about community water security. Somebody uploaded drone footage of Turner Reservoir with dramatic music behind it like they were exposing some national emergency. Rebecca posted long speeches about protecting homeowners from selfish obstruction. Selfish obstruction. Funny way to describe a man refusing to hand over 70 years of family infrastructure. The comments got ugly real quick. Some residents defended me. Mostly older folks who grew up around ranch country. But newer homeowners? Different story. They believed whatever Rebecca told them because she sounded confident and carried binders full of charts to every HOA meeting. That woman loved charts. One post actually claimed I was threatening the subdivision's children by refusing modern utility cooperation. Children. She made it sound like I was hoarding water in barrels while puppies cried in the street. Meanwhile, the truth was a whole lot simpler. Silver Mesa was using way more water than the system was ever designed to support. Every week brought another expansion project. More homes, bigger lawns, decorative fountains running all afternoon while half the county was already under drought warnings. Rebecca even approved construction for a second clubhouse pool despite water restriction notices going out across neighboring ranch communities. That caught people's attention, especially old-timers. One morning I stopped at Benson Feed and Supply to pick up mineral blocks for the cattle, and 3 ranchers were standing around the coffee machine talking about Silver Mesa like it was a coming tornado. Earl Benson shook his head the second I walked in. "Wyatt," he said quietly, "you seen what their water usage numbers hit last month?" I had not. Earl slid a folded county bulletin across the counter. I looked down and nearly laughed out loud. Silver Mesa Estates had increased water demand by almost 40% in 6 months. 40% during the start of a drought year. "That is impossible," I muttered. Earl nodded slowly. "County engineers are already nervous." Another rancher named Bill Turner, no relation, leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Heard they are planning another 100 homes next spring." That made my stomach tighten, because now I understood Rebecca's real problem. Silver Mesa was not just dependent on Turner Reservoir anymore. They were overdependent, dangerously overdependent. And the more that subdivision expanded, the more desperate Rebecca became to control the source feeding it. That same afternoon, I drove out to inspect the western pressure lines running from the reservoir system. Sure enough, water flow rates were way above normal seasonal demand. Sprinklers sprayed nonstop across luxury lawns while nearby ranchers started reducing cattle water rotations to conserve supply. One old farmer down the road had already shut down irrigation for half his hay field. But over at Silver Mesa, artificial waterfalls poured beside the entrance sign 24 hours a day like they were running a casino in Las Vegas. That night, I got another letter from the HOA. This one claimed Turner Ranch now posed potential risk exposure to community infrastructure due to non-compliant independent utility management. I read that sentence 3 times sitting at my kitchen table. Then I laughed so hard coffee nearly came out my nose. Non-compliant independent utility management. That fancy pile of nonsense basically translated to one thing. Rebecca Crawford wanted control. She just had not figured out how to legally take it yet. But here's where things got interesting. A few days later, I noticed county trucks parked outside the subdivision entrance around sunrise. Not maintenance trucks. Engineering department vehicles. Serious ones. Men carrying clipboards walked around inspecting hydrants while another crew measured water pressure at street valves. They looked tense. Real tense. I stopped near the entrance and asked one of the engineers what was going on. The guy glanced around before answering quietly. "Off the record?" "Sure." He lowered his voice. "The system is straining harder than expected. Demand spikes are getting ugly." "How ugly?" He hesitated. Then he said something that stuck in my head for weeks afterward. "If this drought gets worse, Silver Mesa does not have enough independent supply capacity to survive summer restrictions." There it was. The truth hiding underneath all Rebecca's fake authority. Her luxury subdivision was built on a water system it did not actually own. Worse than that, the county already knew it. Suddenly her behavior made perfect sense. The surveys, the easement threats, the contractors, the pressure campaign. Rebecca Crawford was not trying to improve community infrastructure. She was trying to secure control before the shortage became public. And once I realized that, I stopped seeing her as just another power-hungry HOA president. Because this was bigger now. Way bigger. This was about who controlled survival once the drought hit full force. And deep down, I think Rebecca knew exactly what would happen if the residents of Silver Mesa ever discovered the truth. Their million-dollar homes depended entirely on a quiet old rancher she had spent months trying to humiliate. The next thing I did probably saved me. I stopped arguing and started digging. See, most people make the same mistake when somebody powerful starts throwing legal threats around. They panic. They react emotionally. They start yelling back. But my grandfather taught me something different a long time ago sitting beside that reservoir with a tackle box between us. Paperwork has a funny way of making loud people quiet. So instead of fighting Rebecca on Facebook or standing outside HOA meetings arguing with strangers in golf shirts, I drove straight to the Travis County Records building. Old courthouse downtown. Smells like dust, burnt coffee, and 100 years of bad decisions. The kind of place where truth gets buried inside filing cabinets nobody opens anymore. I spent almost 6 hours there the first day. Easement records, water agreements, utility permits, development filings. Most of it was boring enough to put a grown man to sleep. But around mid-afternoon, things started getting real interesting. A county clerk named Diane recognized the Turner name almost immediately. Nice older woman. Reading glasses hanging around her neck on a little chain. Your grandfather helped fund emergency drought lines back in the 50s, did he not? She asked while pulling old records from storage. That sounds like him, I said. She gave me a strange look after that, like she suddenly realized why I was there. About 20 minutes later, she rolled out a giant tube filled with old engineering maps tied together with faded red string. I opened them carefully across a long wooden table and just sat there staring for a second. Original county water infrastructure maps from 1951, hand-drawn, signed by county engineers. And right in the middle of every major distribution line sat one name. Turner Reservoir Emergency Agricultural Supply System. Not community supply. Not county-owned infrastructure. Agricultural emergency system. My system. Then I noticed something even bigger. The county only had temporary emergency distribution rights connected to my reservoir during drought declarations. Temporary. Conditional. Renewable every 10 years. My grandfather never transferred ownership. Ever. The county simply leased emergency access under strict usage limits. Suddenly, every piece of Rebecca's behavior started making sense. She was trying to blur the line between emergency access and permanent ownership. And here's the really crazy part. Silver Mesa Estates was not even listed in the original approved distribution zones. Their subdivision got attached through amended development approvals only 7 years earlier. I leaned back in my chair staring at the paperwork while my stomach slowly tightened. Because the further I dug, the uglier it got. The county approved Silver Mesa based on projected moderate residential consumption estimates. Moderate. But Rebecca's luxury expansion projects had already blown past those limits. Decorative lakes, golf irrigation, second pool installations, oversized lawn maintenance. That subdivision was consuming nearly triple the original forecast numbers. And according to the engineering notes buried in those files, if severe drought conditions activated emergency conservation protections, the reservoir system automatically prioritized agricultural survival first. Cattle operations, fire suppression, historic ranch allocations. Which meant one thing. Silver Mesa's luxury water usage could legally be cut off almost overnight if conditions got bad enough. I actually sat there laughing quietly to myself in the records room because suddenly the whole situation flipped upside down in my head. Rebecca thought she was cornering me. In reality, she was building an entire subdivision on borrowed water she did not legally control. Then came the document that really changed everything. Diane handed me a thin folder marked Emergency Infrastructure Dependency Review. This one was updated 2 years ago, she said. Might interest you. Interest me? Lady, that file nearly stopped my heart. Inside was a county engineering assessment warning officials that Silver Mesa Estates lacked independent long-term water sustainability. The report specifically stated the subdivision remained critically dependent on continued Turner Reservoir access during seasonal shortages. Critically dependent. There it was in black and white. County engineers already knew the subdivision could not survive without my reservoir. Better yet, buried near the bottom was another note saying expanded residential development should be paused until supplemental supply systems were constructed. Paused. Guess what never got paused? Rebecca kept building anyway. More homes, more fountains, more landscaping, more demand. I asked Diane who approved those expansions after the warning. Report. She adjusted her glasses and frowned at the computer screen. Looks like expedited authorization requests came through the County Development Board. Requested by who? She turned the monitor slightly toward me. Rebecca Crawford Development Advisory Committee. I just stared at the screen. There it was. Her fingerprints all over the thing. Rebecca was not trying to secure community safety. She was trying to outrun a ticking time bomb. Every new house brought more HOA fees, more property values, more power. But underneath all that luxury landscaping sat a water system one drought away from collapse. And she knew it. That was the part that chilled me. Rebecca Crawford already understood the danger. She just believed she could pressure me into handing over permanent control before anybody else figured it out. Wrong ranch. Real wrong ranch. Before leaving the courthouse, I made copies of every single document I could legally obtain. Maps, contracts, engineering reports, easement agreements, water priority clauses. Then I drove home with a cardboard box full of paperwork riding shotgun beside me while the Texas sunset turned the sky orange over the highway. I remember gripping the steering while thinking about something my father once said during a drought back in 1988. When water gets scarce, people stop pretending. He was right, because now I finally understood what Rebecca Crawford really was. Not just an HOA bully, not just a control freak. She was a woman desperately trying to hide the fact that her entire luxury empire depended on infrastructure she never actually owned. After that courthouse trip, I stopped seeing Silver Mesa Estates as just another rich neighborhood pretending to be country people. Now I saw it for what it really was. A giant expensive house of cards balanced on top of my reservoir. And the scariest part? Most of the homeowners had absolutely no idea. They thought their HOA fees covered everything. Water security, infrastructure, emergency access, stability. Rebecca sold them that dream from the very beginning. But buried underneath all those glossy brochures and clubhouse ribbon cuttings sat one ugly truth. If Turner Reservoir ever stopped supplying emergency support during a drought, Silver Mesa would panic within days, maybe hours. So I started watching more carefully, quietly. Every morning before sunrise, I drove the outer fence lines, checking the pressure stations and monitoring the water flow meters my father installed decades ago. Those old gauges told stories if you knew how to read them. And what they were telling me now was bad. Real bad. Consumption kept climbing every week. I started noticing sprinkler systems running at noon in 100-degree heat. Decorative fountains spraying water into the wind while nearby ranchers hauled emergency trough tanks to cattle pastures. One afternoon, I counted 6 separate landscaping crews watering brand new sod at the same time inside Silver Mesa. Brand new sod. During a drought advisory. That night, I pulled out the county engineering reports again at my kitchen table and started comparing the numbers. The more I looked, the uglier it got. Rebecca was expanding faster than the infrastructure could legally support. Then came the first crack in her little empire. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from Martin Hale. Same county inspector who stood beside Rebecca during the pumping station stunt. Only this time he sounded nervous. "Mr. Turner," he said quietly, "I think we should talk." He asked to meet at a diner 20 miles outside town instead of the county office. That told me everything immediately. People only choose secret meeting spots when they are scared somebody might see them talking. I found Martin sitting alone in a back booth looking like he had not slept properly in days. He kept checking the windows while stirring cold coffee that he never drank. "You were right about the pressure systems," he admitted before I even sat down. "The HOA contractors almost overloaded the North regulators." I said nothing. Just let him talk. That is another thing age teaches you. Silence makes nervous people fill the room with truth. Martin leaned closer. "Rebecca keeps pushing for permanent infrastructure access permits, fast-tracking everything through county development review. Can she get them?" I asked. He hesitated too long before answering. "Maybe. That one word landed heavy. Maybe. Because in small counties, politics and development money tend to become real close friends. Martin rubbed both hands together nervously. There is pressure from above, Wyatt. Silver Mesa brings tax revenue, property development, investment, and votes, I added quietly. He did not deny it. Then he reached into his bag and slid a thin folder across the table toward me. You did not get this from me. Inside were internal review emails between county planning officials and Rebecca Crawford's advisory committee. I flipped through them slowly while my stomach tightened again. Rebecca had already been warned multiple times by county engineers that Silver Mesa's water demand projections exceeded safe emergency allocation thresholds. Multiple times. But instead of slowing development, she pushed harder. One email from an engineer named Carl Benton stood out immediately. Continued subdivision expansion without supplemental supply acquisition creates long-term dependency risk tied directly to Turner Reservoir emergency infrastructure. Dependency risk. There it was again. Another warning ignored. Then I saw something even worse. Rebecca's committee had proposed reclassifying Turner Reservoir from agricultural emergency infrastructure into shared municipal support infrastructure. Shared again. Always that word. Only now I understood the real game. If she could convince the county to legally redefine the reservoir as shared municipal infrastructure, she could slowly strip away my family's control piece by piece without ever directly buying the land. It would all happen through paperwork, easements, utility reviews, safety regulations, administrative oversight, death by bureaucracy. Martin looked miserable sitting across from me. Carl Benton threatened to resign over this. He admitted quietly. Said the expansion was reckless. Did he? I asked. Martin shook his head slowly. No, they transferred him instead. That told me everything I needed to know about how deep this thing had already gone. Rebecca was not acting alone anymore. Somewhere inside county leadership, people were helping her push this through. Because Silver Mesa meant money. Big money. New developments always do. I drove home angry that night. Not loud angry. Quiet angry. The dangerous kind. The kind that makes a man start organizing documents instead of throwing punches. Once home, I spread every piece of paperwork across my dining table. Contracts, water maps, development approvals, drought clauses, internal emails. My late wife used to joke that I looked happiest surrounded by paperwork and coffee cups. Maybe she was right. Because around midnight, something finally clicked in my head. Rebecca was moving too fast. Way too fast. People only rush when they know time is running out. So I pulled up the county drought forecasts online and nearly froze reading the latest update. Severe summer conditions expected. Emergency conservation protocols possible by July. Suddenly the entire situation made horrifying sense. If emergency drought protections activated before Rebecca secured legal control over Turner Reservoir access, Silver Mesa would immediately fall under agricultural priority restrictions, meaning lawns dry up first, decorative fountains shut down first, luxury usage gets cut first. And once homeowners started realizing their million-dollar subdivision depended entirely on a rancher their HOA president kept publicly attacking, Rebecca Crawford's career would explode like a propane tank in August heat. That was why she looked desperate lately. That was why she kept escalating. She was running out of time. And deep down, I think she finally understood something my grandfather figured out 70 years earlier. In Texas, the person who controls the water controls everything. About 3 weeks before the shutdown happened, Rebecca Crawford made the biggest mistake of her entire life. She got cocky. See, people can hide fear for a while, but eventually pressure starts leaking out sideways. And once Rebecca realized drought restrictions were getting closer, she stopped pretending to be patient. Suddenly, everything sped up. New survey crews started appearing near my ranch roads almost daily. County vehicles kept visiting Silver Mesa after hours. HOA board meetings turned into emergency planning sessions. Even the homeowners started noticing something felt off. One afternoon, I drove past the subdivision entrance and saw residents arguing beside the clubhouse fountain while landscapers replaced perfectly healthy grass with premium drought-resistant turf. That alone told me panic had already started behind closed doors. Rich neighborhoods only spend money like that when somebody upstairs knows bad news is coming. Then my neighbor Earl called around sunset, sounding nervous. Wyatt, he said quietly, you better turn on the local live stream. I walked inside, switched on my old laptop, and nearly laughed out loud. Rebecca had organized a public HOA town hall meeting inside the Silver Mesa Clubhouse ballroom. White tablecloths, fancy bottled water lined up across tables, huge projector screen behind the HOA board. And right there at the center stood Rebecca Crawford wearing a cream-colored blazer and speaking like a politician during election season. Silver Mesa Estates remains fully secure despite misinformation regarding regional drought concerns, she announced confidently. Misinformation. Interesting word choice. Then she clicked to the next slide showing diagrams of the reservoir system. My reservoir system. Except now she labeled it shared community water infrastructure. Shared again. Always shared. But this time she crossed a line. Because sitting right there on that giant projector screen behind her was a modified county infrastructure map showing Turner Reservoir connected directly under Silver Mesa municipal assets. Municipal assets. My jaw tightened immediately. She was publicly presenting my family reservoir as if it already belonged to the subdivision. Worse than that, homeowners were nodding along because they trusted her. Rebecca kept talking smoothly like she rehearsed the speech 50 times. Our legal advisory team continues working closely with county officials to finalize permanent infrastructure stabilization agreements benefiting all residents. Permanent stabilization agreements. That was her polished little phrase for taking control. Then came the moment that changed everything. A homeowner stood up near the back and asked the question Rebecca clearly hoped nobody would ask. Wait, the man said slowly. Does the HOA actually own the water system or not? The entire room got quiet for a second. Rebecca smiled immediately. Too quickly. Silver Mesa maintains guaranteed protected access partnerships through county-supported infrastructure coordination. That is not an answer. And suddenly you could feel the room shifting. Homeowners started looking at each other confused. Another woman raised her hand. So if drought restrictions happen, are we protected? Rebecca hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely noticeable. But I caught it instantly. We do not anticipate service interruptions, she replied carefully. Again, not an answer. Then somebody else asked the worst possible question. What happens if Mr. Turner cuts access? Rebecca's entire face tightened for just a split second before she recovered. Mr. Turner does not control county protected water allocations, she said firmly. That was a lie. A flat-out lie. And deep down, I think she knew she had just gone too far because her voice started getting sharper after that. Faster. More defensive. She spent the next 10 minutes attacking fear-based rumors and outdated agricultural claims while avoiding direct answers. But the damage was already done. Homeowners smelled fear now. You could see it all over the livestream comments too. People asking why emergency reservoir access was still temporary. Asking why expansion continued during drought warnings. Asking whether Silver Mesa even had independent supply rights. Rebecca ended the livestream early claiming technical difficulties. Real smooth. The next morning things escalated hard. I woke up before sunrise to the sound of engines near the north gate. When I drove over, I found contractors unloading massive steel barriers beside my reservoir access road. Temporary traffic control equipment. One worker handed me a laminated notice saying the road was now under County Supervised Infrastructure Review Access Management. Meaning Rebecca somehow convinced county officials to partially restrict my own access road while they reviewed permanent utility easement proposals. I stood there reading that notice while dust blew across the ranch, and one thought kept repeating inside my head. She is desperate now. Then I saw something else that changed the entire game. Parked beside the contractors was a black SUV from the Texas Water Development Board. State level. Not county. State. That got my attention fast. Because once state drought officials start showing up, everybody gets nervous. One older man stepped out carrying folders under his arm and walked straight toward the pumping station fence. I recognized him immediately. Harold Mercer, Senior Drought Infrastructure Investigator. Serious man. Does not smile much. We met years ago during wildfire water coordination work. Harold glanced at the barriers, then at the contractors, then finally at me. Morning, Wyatt, he said calmly. Looks like things got political out here. Political. That one word told me he already knew something smelled wrong. Rebecca appeared about 10 minutes later in her Cadillac, acting confident like always, but I noticed something different immediately. Her hands were shaking slightly while she adjusted her sunglasses. Tiny detail. Most people would miss it. I did not. Harold asked one simple question while looking directly at her. Mrs. Crawford, can you provide documentation confirming permanent municipal ownership rights tied to Turner Reservoir? Silence. Complete silence. Rebecca opened her folder, closed it again, tried smiling. We are currently finalizing infrastructure coordination reviews through county channels, she answered carefully. Harold did not even blink. That was not my question. And right there beside the reservoir gate, with contractors standing around awkwardly and county workers suddenly real quiet, I watched the first real crack split straight through Rebecca Crawford's perfect little empire. 3 days after Harold Mercer showed up at the reservoir gate, the county called an emergency public hearing. And when I say emergency, I mean people were panicking. The drought forecast had gotten worse overnight. Local news stations started running headlines about possible regional water restrictions. Suddenly, everybody in Silver Mesa wanted answers real fast. Funny how fast confidence disappears when sprinklers stop running. The hearing took place inside the county administration building downtown. Big, ugly room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and rows of folding chairs packed full of angry homeowners. I showed up early wearing the same thing I always wear. Boots, denim jacket, old hat, nothing fancy. Rebecca arrived 15 minutes later with 2 lawyers carrying leather briefcases and enough paperwork to build a small fort. But here is what caught my attention immediately. She looked exhausted. Makeup covered most of it, but not all. Her smile felt forced now, tight around the edges, like somebody trying to hold together a cracked windshield with duct tape. Homeowners surrounded her the second she walked inside. Are we losing water? What happens to our mortgages if restrictions hit? Did the HOA know about the drought reports? Rebecca answered every question the same way. Fast, smooth, confident sounding, but not actually saying anything. Same trick politicians used during scandals. Meanwhile, Harold Mercer sat quietly near the front beside 2 state water officials reviewing documents without speaking to anybody. That room felt tense enough to crack glass. Then the hearing started. County commissioners opened with drought updates first. Reservoir levels dropping. Conservation thresholds approaching. Emergency protocols under review. Every sentence made the room more nervous. Then Harold stood up holding a thick folder under one arm. State investigators completed a preliminary review of Silver Mesa Estate's infrastructure dependency status, he announced calmly. Complete silence. You could hear air conditioning vents humming overhead. Harold opened the folder slowly. Current findings indicate the subdivision remains critically dependent on temporary emergency agricultural allocations connected to Turner Reservoir. There it was. Out loud. Public. Official. The room exploded instantly. Homeowners started shouting all at once. Temporary. What do you mean temporary? Our realtor said the water system was secure. Rebecca jumped up immediately. Silver Mesa maintains county-protected access. Agreements, she snapped. Harold looked directly at her without blinking. Temporary agreements, he corrected calmly. Not ownership. That one sentence hit the room like a truck. You could actually feel people processing it in real time. One older homeowner stood up looking pale. Wait, he said slowly. Does Mr. Turner own the reservoir or not? Harold nodded once. Turner Reservoir remains privately owned agricultural infrastructure operating under conditional county emergency access contracts originally established in 1951. Then every head in that room turned toward me at the exact same time. Rebecca tried cutting in again fast. The HOA acted in good faith based on county development approvals. Big mistake. Harold immediately pulled another document from the folder. State investigators also discovered repeated warnings issued regarding unsustainable subdivision expansion tied to water dependency risk. He laid the reports on the table one by one. Engineering assessments, drought projections, expansion warnings, internal review memos. All the paperwork Rebecca spent months pretending did not exist. The homeowners started getting angry now. Real angry. One man near the back yelled, "You told us expansion was fully approved." Another woman stood up holding HOA payment records in her hand. "We paid special infrastructure fees for 2 years." Rebecca's lawyers suddenly looked a whole lot less confident. One of them started whispering rapidly into her ear while flipping through papers. Then Harold dropped the final bomb. Due to current drought escalation, emergency agricultural priority protections automatically activated at midnight. The entire room froze. Because now everybody understood what that meant. Turner Ranch legally moved to the front of the water priority line. Not golf courses. Not decorative fountains. Not luxury landscaping. Agriculture first. Survival first. Exactly the way my grandfather designed the contracts 70 years ago. Rebecca turned toward me finally. Her voice sounded completely different now. Smaller somehow. Wyatt, she said carefully. Surely we can work something out for the community. Community. Funny word coming from the woman who spent months treating me like some obstacle she could bulldoze with paperwork. I looked at her quietly for a second before answering. I never wanted your neighborhood to lose water, I said honestly. I wanted you to stop pretending my family's reservoir belonged to your HOA. Nobody said a word after that. Because deep down, everybody in that room knew the truth now. This whole disaster did not happen because of drought. It happened because Rebecca Crawford confused dependency with ownership. She thought needing something gave her authority over it. Wrong ranch. Final wrong mistake. By the end of that week, Rebecca resigned from the HOA board. State investigators opened formal reviews into the subdivision approvals and infrastructure disclosures. The county suspended all new Silver Mesa development permits indefinitely. And those giant decorative fountains at the subdivision entrance? Shut off permanently. These days things are quieter again out at Turner Ranch. The reservoir still fogs over at sunrise. Cattle still crowd the troughs before noon heat rolls in. And every once in a while I drive past Silver Mesa and notice something interesting. The homeowners wave now. Most of them finally understand what my grandfather figured out all those years ago. Property lines matter. Water rights matter. Paperwork matters. Because no matter how loud somebody talks or how expensive their neighborhood looks, documentation beats intimidation every single time.